She picked up the phone and made one call. One call. And, just like that, a woman who had spent 6 years building her life in a country that was not hers lost everything. No hearing. No investigation. No chance to speak. Just a government official. A database. And 4 sentences that closed every door in Seoul against a woman who had done nothing wrong. That was 2 years ago. Now it is a Tuesday morning. And Dr. Hyun-ja Choi is standing in that same woman's waiting room. No driver. No title. No power that means anything in this room. Her hands are pressed together in front of her chest. Her voice, the voice that has ended careers without blinking, is barely above a whisper. Please, she says. You are the only one who can save my son. Amara Okafor looks at her for a long time. And the whole world holds its breath. Stay with me, because what happened to this woman over the next 2 years will stay with you long after this story ends. Now, before I tell you what happened next, think about the last person who had power over you and used it like you didn't matter. Most of the time, they walk away untouched, promoted, praised, protected. But every once in a while, the universe remembers. And when the balance shifts, it shifts completely. Let me take you back to where this all began. A Thursday evening. A government ministry dinner in Gangnam. Crystal glasses. Catered food. 12 of Seoul's most powerful healthcare officials around a table. Dr. Hyun-ja Choi is giving a speech about the importance of protecting frontline healthcare workers. The room applauds. Someone calls her a champion of the system. She smiles. She thanks them. She means it in the way that people mean things they have said so many times the words have become automatic. That same morning, she had filed a regulatory notation that erased a nurse's career. She had not thought about it once between then and now. That is the kind of woman Hyun-ja had become. Not evil. Not deliberately cruel. Just so far above the human texture of her decisions that she had stopped feeling their weight. She grew up in Nowon, northern Seoul. A father who worked 6 days a week. A mother who ironed other people's clothes until midnight. She had climbed every rung without help. By 44, she was deputy director of the Seoul Regional Health Ministry, overseeing nursing licenses, hospital standards, and healthcare staffing across the entire Seoul region. She had earned every centimeter of that position. Nobody gave it to her. But somewhere between the bottom and the top, the empathy that once drove her had been quietly replaced by control, by image. By the need to maintain a version of herself that had slowly become more important than the people standing behind it. Her husband Park Jae-won, a respected administrator at Gangnam Mairi Hospital, a man with connections across Seoul's entire medical network, had tried to tell her. Once, over dinner, their son Juno upstairs doing homework. Hyun-ja, you used to ask people how they were. Now you only ask what they need from you. Those are not the same question. She went back to her phone without answering. He carried his plate to the kitchen alone. He had stopped trying to explain it after that. Because some people only understand the weight of what they have lost, after they have lost it. That same night, while Jae-won ate alone in the kitchen, Hyun-ja sat at her desk and reviewed the regulatory notation she had filed that morning. She made one small correction to the wording. And then she went to bed and slept perfectly. Before I introduce you to the woman at the center of the story, if you are new here, welcome to Afro Soul Romance Tales. This channel exists for people who believe that grace is more powerful than authority. That showing up matters more than status. If that is you, hit subscribe right now. Because the woman you are about to meet was built from exactly that belief. Now let me introduce you to Amara. Amara Okafor grew up watching her mother walk. No car. Sometimes no proper road. Just her mother Ngozi, a community health worker in Lagos, Nigeria, walking to reach the patients the system had decided were too far away to matter. Amara watched this her entire childhood. She watched her mother dress wounds in cramped rooms with barely any supplies and still make the patient feel completely safe. She watched her walk home exhausted, eat whatever was left, and wake the next morning ready to go again. Amara never once heard her complain. And when Amara was 12 years old, she asked her mother why. Why keep walking for people who cannot pay you? Why keep showing up for a system that does not show up for you? Ngozi stopped walking. She turned around. And she said something that Amara carried into every room she ever entered after that. Amara, a person in pain does not need your pity. They need your presence. Show up. That is the whole job. 12 years old. 11 words. And they became the foundation of everything Amara ever built. She trained at the University of Lagos School of Nursing. Graduated in the top 5% of her cohort. Spent 3 years at Lagos University Teaching Hospital, one of the largest hospitals in West Africa, where she developed something her supervisors struggled to fully capture in performance reviews, but always noted without fail. Amara could sense when a patient was turning before the machine said so. It was not luck, not instinct in any mystical sense. It was thousands of hours of fully present, deeply attentive nursing, the kind Ngozi had modeled for her on those roads in Lagos. She noticed the micro-changes others missed. The slight shift in breathing rhythm. The way a patient's fingers moved differently when something was wrong that no monitor had yet registered. She noticed the things that happened in a body before the body announced them. Senior doctors at Lagos University Teaching Hospital began requesting her specifically for complex post-operative cardiac cases. She was 27 old. She was extraordinary. And she had no idea yet how indispensable that gift was about to become, or what it would first cost her to keep it. Then one morning she saw a notice on the staff board. The South Korean government was recruiting skilled nurses from select African countries as part of a bilateral healthcare program. Competitive application. Full work authorization. Placement in a licensed Seoul hospital. Amara stared at that notice for a long time. She thought about her mother walking those roads. She applied that same evening. She landed at Incheon International Airport on a Thursday in February. The coldest month. She stepped outside with 2 suitcases and a coat that was nowhere near thick enough for a Korean winter. The wind came off the Han River and stopped her completely. She stood on that pavement and looked at Seoul stretching before her, the towers of glass and light, the stacked highways, the signs in a script she was still learning to read, and felt something she had not expected. Small. Not defeated. Just honestly, humanly small. The way anyone feels standing at the beginning of something enormous, with no guarantee of how it ends. She took a breath. She picked up her suitcases. She kept moving. She was placed at Hanul Sungsim Medical Center in Seoul, one of the most prestigious private hospitals in the city. Head nurse Park Soo-yeon shook her hand on the first morning and said in careful English, "We are glad you are here, Nurse Okafor." "I hope to earn that," Amara said quietly. The first months were the hardest of her life. Not because the work was beyond her, the work she could do in her sleep. But everything surrounding it was unfamiliar in ways she had not fully prepared for. She studied Korean medical terminology every night after her shifts, falling asleep over textbooks with a highlighter still in her hand. She navigated cultural hierarchies she was still learning to read. She felt in certain rooms, certain corridors, in eyes that moved past her without fully landing, that her presence here was not quite what some people had pictured when they imagined their staff. She did not confront those looks. She did not report them. She did not carry them home and let them grow. She did what her mother taught her. She showed up. Every single shift. Fully present. Fully herself. And slowly, the way genuine competence always eventually moves through doubt, people began to see what she could do. Within 18 months, Amara had become the nurse that other nurses called when something was going wrong and nobody could explain why. Senior doctors began requesting her specifically for complex cardiac post-operative cases. Head nurse Park Soo-yeon filed a formal commendation describing her as among the most instinctively gifted clinical nurses Hanul Sungsim had seen in a decade. A decade. She was 28 years old. 6,000 kilometers from home. And she was quietly becoming irreplaceable. Remember that word. Irreplaceable. Because it is the only word that matters when we get to Juno. She was not erased because she failed. She was erased because she succeeded too completely. Which is exactly when Dr. Hyun-ja Choi walked onto her floor and decided to erase her. Stay with me. Because what happened next is the part that is going to make your chest tight. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. And somehow, that makes it so much worse. It was a Wednesday afternoon in March. Hyun-ja was at Hanul Sungsim for a routine ministry inspection, the kind of visit that made administrators straighten their ties and nurses double-check their documentation. She moved through the hospital with 2 junior officials trailing behind her, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, acknowledging no one. On the 5th floor cardiac ward, she stopped to review patient files with Dr. Shin Tae-yang, the ward's senior cardiologist. Quiet, precise, 11 years at this hospital. Remember his name. Dr. Shin is not the antagonist of this story. He is a witness. And later, the man whose words will bring Hyun-ja's entire world to its knees. As they spoke, a patient's call button activated. Then again. Then a third time. Hyun-ja glanced toward the room. Why has that not been answered? Nurse Okafor is completing a critical postoperative check in room 501, Dr. Shin said. She will be. There are other nurses on this floor. At that moment, Amara came out of room 501. Moving with the controlled, quiet urgency of someone who had already registered the call button and was already handling it. She passed Hyun-ja and Dr. Shin with a brief, respectful nod. Good afternoon. She went into the room. Spoke to the patient in calm, steady Korean. Checked his drip, adjusted his position, then pressed 2 fingers lightly against his wrist, holding them there 3 seconds longer than standard protocol required, her eyes slightly unfocused, listening to something the machines in that room had not yet picked up. She was back out in under 4 minutes. Hyun-ja had watched every second of it. Something about it unsettled her. Not the competence, even Hyun-ja could see the competence. What unsettled her was something she could not cleanly name. The way the patient's eyes tracked Amara with something close to relief when she appeared. The way Dr. Shin spoke about her, with that particular quality reserved for someone deeply, genuinely trusted. And the way Amara had looked at Hyun-ja when she passed. Not afraid. Not deferential beyond basic courtesy. Just steady. Clear. Present. Like a person who knew exactly who she was and did not need Hyun-ja's validation of it. Hyun-ja said nothing. She finished her inspection. She returned to her office. But that steadiness stayed with her in a way she did not examine and did not dismiss. 3 days later the trigger came. Hyun-ja's closest friend was Mrs. Oh Chae-won, wife of a prominent National Assembly member. Her elderly mother-in-law, Mrs. Oh Bok-soon, had been admitted to Hanul Sungsim for a routine cardiac procedure, and Mrs. Oh had called Hyun-ja personally to ensure comfortable, attentive care. What neither woman knew was that the nurse assigned to that patient's critical postoperative monitoring was Amara, placed there by Dr. Shin specifically because of her cardiac expertise. Mrs. Oh Bok-soon was anxious and difficult. When Amara came to conduct her checks, the elderly woman asked where she was from, and then said plainly that she would prefer a Korean nurse. Amara did not react. She completed every clinical check with full professionalism, ensured the patient was medically stable and comfortable, and reported the preference to head nurse Park Soo-yeon exactly as protocol required. Head nurse Park handled it correctly. She reassigned the bedside comfort duties to a Korean colleague while keeping Amara on the critical postoperative medical monitoring. Because removing Amara from that clinical role was not something she was medically willing to do. Mrs. Oh Chae-won visited that evening. She heard a version of the story filtered through an anxious elderly woman's wounded pride. She called Hyun-ja that night. Your foreign nurse made my mother-in-law uncomfortable in her own hospital room. This reflects on ministry standards, Hyun-ja. Hyun-ja did not ask for Amara's account. She did not request head nurse Park's report. She did not look at the commendation filed 3 weeks earlier. She said, I will handle it. And she picked up her pen. The next morning Hyun-ja called the chief administrator of Hanul Sungsim. No investigation. No review. Just a directive, in the quiet absolute tone of a government official whose signature approved his hospital's operating license, that nurse Amara Okafor's placement was to be terminated. Immediately. He did not push back. That afternoon Amara was called into his office. He looked at the wall behind her. Your placement is being terminated effective today. On what grounds? Her voice was completely steady. Performance concerns raised at ministry level. I have a commendation filed 3 weeks ago. Not a single formal complaint in 18 months. I would like to understand specifically. The decision has come from above my level. I am sorry. Above his level. Amara understood exactly what that meant. She stood. She thanked him. And she walked out. But Hyun-ja was not finished. Because losing one placement was something Amara could recover from. She had her record. She had Dr. Shin's respect. She could apply elsewhere. Hyun-ja knew that. So she filed a formal regulatory notation against Amara's nursing license through the ministry's staffing database. Not an official charge. Not something that could be cleanly appealed. Just a quiet bureaucratic flag, the kind that made hiring managers pause, that made HR departments make discreet phone calls, that made opportunities vanish before Amara could reach the door. For sentences in a government database. And every licensed medical facility in Seoul closed against Amara Okafor at the same time. The morning after Amara left, the fifth-floor cardiac ward at Hanul Sungsim felt different. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would show up in a report. Just quieter. In the wrong way. Mr. Beck, 71 years old, recovering from a cardiac procedure, pressed his call button at 6:45 in the morning. He pressed it again at 6:50. And again at 6:58. When a nurse finally came, 13 minutes later, it was not Amara. Where is the Nigerian nurse? He asked. The one who always checks my pulse twice. She no longer works on this floor, the nurse said. Mr. Beck frowned. Why not? No one answered. Down the corridor, Mrs. Lim, 63, diabetic, always anxious before her morning insulin check, sat in her bed and waited. Amara used to talk to her while she worked. She knew the names of Mrs. Lim's grandchildren. She knew Mrs. Lim was afraid of the dark and always left the corridor light on during night checks. The new nurse checked the numbers. Recorded them. Left. Mrs. Lim stared at the ceiling. Head nurse Park Seon noticed within a week. Complaint numbers on the 5th floor went up. Patient satisfaction scores dipped. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing that would make headlines. Just a quiet absence. Like a room that had lost its warmth and nobody could explain why. Park Soo-yeon knew why. She sat in her office that evening and stared at Amara's empty file. She thought about calling her. Apologizing. Explaining. But what could she say? I let them erase you because I was afraid to fight for you. That is not an apology. That is a confession. So she said nothing. And somewhere across Seoul, in a small rented room in Mapogu, Amara Okafor sat on the floor with 4 rejection letters and her mother's voice in her head. And decided she was not going home. She called Ngozi that night. She did not tell her the full truth. She said things were difficult. That there had been a complication. That she was figuring it out. Ngozi was quiet for a moment. Then she said in that voice, the one that had steadied 1,000 frightened patients on the roads of Lagos. Amara, you did not go all that way to come back empty. You went there to give. Keep giving. Even when they take. Amara hung up the phone. She sat in the dark for a very long time. She thought about the 2 suitcases she arrived with. The February wind at Incheon. Every patient who had called her name in the dark. Every morning she chose to show up fully in a place that did not always make her feel fully welcome. She thought about all of it. And she made her decision. She was not going home. What she built in the next 2 years, in that small clinic nobody visited, is the part of the story that will make you put your hand over your mouth. 6 weeks later, she found a small community health clinic in Mapogu. A converted building serving undocumented migrants, low-income families, and the people Seoul's formal healthcare system had decided were too invisible to prioritize. The pay was a fraction of Hanul Sungsim. The equipment was old. Some days the supply cabinet was nearly bare. But the patients needed her. And Amara needed to be needed. She showed up on her first morning in fresh scrubs. She learned every patient's name by the end of the first week. She noticed who was scared, who needed extra time, who just needed someone to sit with them for 5 minutes before a procedure. Within 3 months, the clinic's patient outcomes were the best they had ever recorded. Nobody wrote about it. Nobody gave a speech about it. But every person who walked through that door knew that someone in there genuinely cared about them. That someone was Amara Okafor. A woman the system had tried to erase. Still showing up. Still giving. Drop a comment right now. What would you do if someone with all the power tried to erase you? I am reading every single one. Now back to Seoul. 2 years have passed. And somewhere across the city, a 14-year-old boy named Juno is about to collapse. The arrhythmia hiding in his chest is not something a standard scan will catch. It is the kind that hides in plain sight, patient, quiet, deadly. The kind that only one person in Seoul has sat with closely enough to recognize before it becomes catastrophic. It started the way the most dangerous things always start. Quietly. Juno had been tired for weeks. Not the dramatic exhaustion that sends parents to emergency rooms, just a persistent, unremarkable fatigue that everyone around him had a perfectly reasonable explanation for. He was 14. He was studying hard. He had football practice 3 times a week. He was a teenager in Seoul, and teenagers in Seoul pushed themselves too hard and came home pale and drained, and that was simply what that looked like. His father Jae-won had noticed. He mentioned it to Hyun-ja twice. He seems tired. More than usual. He has exams, she said without looking up. That was the end of the conversation. On a Monday evening, Juno came downstairs for dinner. He sat at the table. He reached for his glass of water. And then, without warning, without a sound, his eyes went unfocused, and he slid sideways off his chair and hit the kitchen floor. The glass shattered. Jae-won was on his feet before it finished falling. Juno. Juno. The boy's lips had a faint bluish tinge. His breathing was shallow and irregular. His pulse, Jae-won found it immediately, his fingers pressing hard against his son's neck, was wrong. Skipping. Stuttering. Like a song with notes missing. Hyun-ja stood in the kitchen doorway. She had heard the crash from the living room. She saw her son on the floor. And the world went completely silent around her. Not the powerful silence of a boardroom she controlled. The terrifying silence of a mother who has no control at all. Call the ambulance, Jae-won said. His voice was steady because he was trained to make it steady. But his hands, pressing against his son's neck, were shaking. Hyun-ja called. She gave the address. She answered every question. She did everything correctly and efficiently because that is what she always did. And then she knelt on the kitchen floor beside her son and held his hand. And felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, completely, utterly powerless. The ambulance came in 8 minutes. They took Juno to Hanul's Songsim Medical Center. The same hospital where a nurse had once pressed 2 fingers against a patient's wrist and heard something the machines had missed. The doctors ran every standard test. And what they found, or rather what they almost missed, is the part that changes everything. The first 24 hours were a blur of tests and consultations and corridors that Hyun-ja had walked 100 times, but now felt completely foreign. Jae-won moved through the hospital with quiet efficiency, who to call, which consultant to request, which department to push. He used every connection built over 20 years as a hospital administrator. He made calls at midnight. He pulled favors he had been saving for years. He got Juno seen by the best cardiac team in the hospital within hours. He got the scans expedited. He got the results prioritized. And when the results came back inconclusive, he made more calls. He was a man with enormous reach inside Seoul's medical world. He knew that. But reach and answers are not the same thing. And for the first time in his career, Park Jae-won was sitting in a hospital corridor, head in his hands, phone on the seat beside him with 17 unanswered messages, unable to get a clear answer about what was happening inside his own son's chest. Hyun-ja sat beside him. She had not left the hospital, had not changed her clothes. The woman who always looked immaculate, who had not been seen without full composure in 20 years, was sitting in a corridor in yesterday's clothes with red eyes and cold coffee. Someone knows what this is, she said quietly. Someone knows. On the 3rd day, Dr. Shin Tae-young walked into the case. He reviewed Juno's file for 2 hours. Studied every scan, every reading, every chart note. He examined the boy personally. Sat with him for 40 minutes, longer than any other doctor had, asking quiet questions and watching the answers as much as listening to them. Then he walked into the family consultation room where Hyun-ja and Jae-won were waiting. He sat down. He folded his hands on the table. And Hyun-ja, who had learned to read rooms the way other people read faces, felt her stomach drop before he opened his mouth. Juno has a rare form of cardiac arrhythmia, Dr. Shin said carefully. It does not present typically on standard scans, which is why it was not immediately identified. It is serious. And it is progressing. Jae-won leaned forward. What do we do? There is a procedure. Delicate. But it is the right path. Dr. Shin paused. What concerns me is the post-operative period. The recovery window is narrow and critical. This arrhythmia has a very specific post-operative presentation. The nurse managing his recovery needs to know what to look for before the monitors announce it. One missed signal in those first hours, one delayed response, and we lose the ground the procedure gained. Then find that nurse, Hyun-ja said immediately. The boardroom voice. The ministry voice. Whatever the cost. Whoever it is. Dr. Shin looked at her. He did not look away. I know exactly who it is, he said quietly. I have known since I reviewed Juno's file this morning. Something in his tone made the room go still. There is one nurse in Seoul whose instincts with this specific post-operative presentation I would trust completely. I have watched her work. I have seen her catch what machines miss. I have never in 3 decades of cardiology seen a post-operative instinct like hers. Hyun-ja nodded. Then contact them. Whatever. Her name, Dr. Shin said, is Amara Okafor. The room went completely silent. Jae-won looked at his wife. He did not know the name. But he saw her face. And he knew, with the quiet certainty of a man who had been married to this woman for 18 years, that something was very wrong. Hyun-ja's face had not moved. But behind her eyes, everything had collapsed. She used to work at this hospital, Dr. Shin continued, his voice steady and deliberate. I understand she is no longer in the licensed hospital system. She is currently working at a community clinic in Mapogu. He paused. I need her here within 48 hours. Juno's window does not extend beyond that. He stood. He looked at Hyun-ja one final time. I will leave the arrangements to you. He walked out. And Dr. Hyun-ja Choi sat in that consultation room and felt the full weight of 4 sentences in a government database come back to rest on her chest. She had spent her entire career making sure she was never in a room where she did not hold the advantage. And now she was going to have to drive to a small clinic in Mapogu and stand in front of the woman she had erased. With nothing. No title that would help her. No signature that would fix this. No power that meant anything in that room. Just a mother. And a name she had spent 2 years hoping never to hear again. That night Jae-won found out. Not everything. Not every detail. But enough. He had made his own quiet inquiries after Dr. Shin left. He had called people he trusted. And what came back, slowly, in fragments, told him enough to understand why his wife had gone completely silent in that consultation room. He found her in Juno's hospital room late that night. Juno was asleep, monitors beeping softly. Hyun-ja was sitting beside the bed holding their son's hand, her eyes fixed on his face. Jae-won sat down across from her. He did not raise his voice. He spoke in the same quiet, measured tone he always used. The tone that somehow carried more weight than shouting ever could. Tell me what happened with the nurse. Hyun-ja closed her eyes. She told him. Not the sanitized version. The real one. The phone call from Mrs. O. The directive to the administrator. The regulatory flag. The 4 sentences that closed every door in the city against a woman who had done nothing wrong. Jae-won listened without interrupting. When she finished, the room was very quiet. I have used every contact I have, he said finally. Every connection. Every favor I have built in 20 years. And I cannot find another answer. He looked at her. You have to go to her, Hyun-ja. She opened her eyes. Not as the deputy director. Not with a check or a lawyer or a title. You have to go as yourself. As his mother. And you have to tell her the truth. Hyun-ja looked at their son sleeping in the bed. The monitors beeped steadily. She nodded once. She drove herself. No driver. No assistant. No ministry vehicle. She drove through Seoul at 7 in the morning, through the early traffic and the gray winter light, across the bridge over the Han River, through the streets of Mapogu that felt nothing like the parts of Seoul she normally moved through. She parked in the small uneven car park outside the clinic. She sat in the car for 4 minutes. She looked at the building, the converted structure with its peeling paint and its hand-lettered sign, and its waiting room already filling with people who had nowhere else to go. She thought about all the times she had walked into rooms holding power like a shield. She had nothing to hold today. She got out of the car. She walked inside. The waiting room smelled like old linoleum and antiseptic. The receptionist looked up. "I need to speak with Nurse Amara Okafor," Hyun-ja said quietly. "Please." That last word. Please. It came out unfamiliar in her own mouth. 3 minutes later, Amara walked out from the back corridor. And stopped. The two women stood 6 feet apart in that narrow waiting room. Amara did not gasp. She did not flinch. She looked at Hyun-ja with the same steady, clear eyes that had unsettled her 2 years ago in the corridor of Hanul Sungsim. The eyes that were not afraid. The eyes that simply saw. "Mrs. Choi," Amara said. Neutral. Professional. Hyun-ja opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She had prepared words in the car. Rehearsed a sentence. But standing here in front of those eyes, every prepared word dissolved. "Can we speak outside?" she managed. They walked through a side door into a small courtyard. A wooden bench. A single tree. The faint sound of the city beyond the walls. They sat. Hyun-ja stared at her hands in her lap. The hands that had held a pen over a government database 2 years ago and written 4 sentences that changed a woman's life. Those same hands now had nothing to hold. She tried to speak. She could not find the beginning. Amara waited. Patient the way she waited with every patient. The way she was built. Finally Hyun-ja spoke. "My son." She stopped. Tried again. "His name is Juno. He is 14. Her voice cracked on 14. She pressed on. "There is a cardiac condition. Dr. Shin says there is a procedure." But the post-operative window, she stopped again. Jaw tightening. "He says there is one nurse. One person in all of Seoul whose instincts with this specific presentation he trusts completely." She looked at Amara. "He said your name." Silence. "I know what I did." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "I know about the flag in the database. I know you applied to 4 hospitals. I know why they all said no." Amara said nothing. "I did it because a friend called me and asked me to handle something. And I handled it without asking a single question. Without looking at your record. Without giving you the right to speak." A tear fell onto the back of her hand. She looked at it. "I have no right to ask you for anything," she said. "I know that. But my son is 14 years old and the window is 48 hours and you are the only." Her voice broke completely. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Amara sat with that for a long time. The tree moved in the winter wind. The city carried on beyond the walls. Indifferent. Enormous. She thought about the floor of her room in Mapogu. The 4 rejection letters. Her mother's voice. The 2 suitcases she had almost taken back to Incheon. She thought about a 14-year-old boy who had nothing to do with any of it. She looked at Hyun-ja. "What time does Dr. Shin need me?" Hyun-ja's breath left her body all at once. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, the involuntary shudder of a person who has been holding themselves together for days and has just been given permission to stop. 7, she managed. "Tomorrow morning." Amara nodded. "I will be there." And Hyun-ja, Deputy Director of the Seoul Regional Health Ministry, the most powerful oversight figure in Seoul's entire healthcare system, bent forward on that bench and wept. Not the composed, dignified kind. The kind that comes from a place so deep you did not know it existed. The kind that shakes your whole body and does not stop. Amara did not touch her. She did not need to. She just sat there. Steady. Present. The way her mother taught her. She walked back into the hospital that had erased her. Not for Hyun-ja. For a boy who had asked for none of this. And what happened inside that operating theater is the part of the story that will stay with you forever. Amara arrived at Hanul Sungsim at 6:45 the following morning. Her ID badge was temporary. Her name printed in fresh ink. The security guard looked at it and nodded. She walked to the elevator. Pressed 5. The doors opened on the cardiac ward. Head nurse Park Soo-yeon was waiting. Her eyes were red. She had been there since 6. Amara. Soo-yeon. I should have fought for you, head nurse Park said, her voice tight and controlled. When it happened, I should have pushed back. I should have. That is not why I am here today, Amara said gently. Where is Juno? Room 512. Dr. Shin is prepping. He is expecting you. Then let's go. They walked together down the corridor. Past the nurse's station. Past the rooms Amara had once known by heart. Past the spot on the 5th floor where she had once pressed 2 fingers against a patient's wrist and heard something no machine in the room had yet detected. She did not look at that spot. She looked straight ahead. She had a patient to save. The procedure took 5 hours. Dr. Shin led the surgical team. Amara was in that room for every second, monitoring Juno's vitals with the particular quality of attention that had made her irreplaceable, watching the numbers, watching the boy, watching the spaces between the numbers where the real information lived. 3 hours in, Juno's rhythm shifted. Not dramatically. Not in the way that fills a room with noise and alarm. Just a subtle wrong note in a pattern that most people in that room were not listening for closely enough. Amara moved before anyone spoke. She adjusted the post-operative drip, recalibrated the dosage, made 2 precise changes that took her 11 seconds. Dr. Shin glanced at her across the table. He did not say a word. He did not need to. He nodded once, the nod of a man watching someone do exactly what he knew they were capable of, and turned back to his work. Juno's rhythm steadied. The room exhaled. In the waiting room downstairs, Hyun-ja sat in a plastic chair. Jae-won beside her. She was holding his hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She had sat in this hospital 100 times, in leather chairs, in corner offices, in rooms where she held all the power. Now she sat in a plastic chair with yesterday's coffee going cold beside her, and nothing to do but wait and pray. At 12:47, Dr. Shin walked through the door. Hyun-ja was on her feet before he reached her. He looked at her. And he smiled. The procedure was successful. Juno is stable. His cardiac response is already improving. Hyun-ja's legs buckled. Jae-won caught her. She pressed her face into his chest and made a sound she had never made before in her professional life, the raw broken sound of a mother who has just been handed back her child. Thank you, she kept saying. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Shin held up one hand. Thank Nurse Okafor. 3 hours and Juno's rhythm shifted. It was the precise presentation I warned about. The window to respond was seconds. She caught it before anyone else in that room. Before the monitors announced it. He paused. If she had been 3 seconds slower, we would be having a very different conversation right now. 3 seconds. That was the distance between the life Hyun-ja still had and the one she almost did not. And on that 3-second window stood a woman who had every reason in the world to say no. Before I tell you how this ends, drop a comment right now and tell me what story you want me to tell next. I am in the comments. I read everything. Now, the ending. 3 weeks later. Juno was home. Recovering well. Sitting on the sofa complaining that his mother kept checking on him too often. Which meant he was going to be completely fine. Hyun-ja had gone back to work. She had answered her emails. She had attended her meetings. She had looked at the faces of the people around her, the junior officials, the administrative staff, the nurses whose licenses passed across her desk, and she had seen them, for the first time in years, as fully human. But something would not leave her alone. For sentences in a government database. On a Tuesday morning, she walked into the Seoul Regional Health Ministry Board meeting. Monthly review. Standard agenda. 12 people around the table. 20 minutes in, during a routine discussion about nursing staffing standards, Dr. Hyun-ja Choi stopped speaking mid-sentence. The room waited. She looked down at the table. Her hands were flat on the surface in front of her. She was very still. Nobody had ever seen her still like this. I need to say something, she said. Her voice was different. Stripped of something. It is not on the agenda. 12 people exchanged glances. 2 years ago. She stopped. The room waited. 2 years ago, I filed a regulatory notation against a nurse's license. Her name is Amara Okafor. She was looking at the table when she said it. She had done nothing wrong. She had an exemplary record. Her voice caught. She was one of the finest post-operative nurses at Hanul Sungsem. Possibly in Seoul. Silence. I filed that notation because a friend called me and asked me to handle something. And I handled it without asking a single question. Without reviewing her record. Without giving her the right to speak. Her chin was trembling now. 12 people staring at her. Nobody in that room had ever seen this woman's chin tremble. 3 weeks ago. She stopped. Pressed her lips together. 3 weeks ago, that same nurse sat in an operating theater for 5 hours. A tear fell onto the table in front of her. She looked at it. She saved my son. The room went completely silent. Not the professional silence of a meeting. The kind of silence that happens when something true and terrible and human enters a room that is not used to any of those things. The notation has been removed from her record. A formal ministry commendation has been filed. She looked up. 12 faces. I am also tendering my resignation. Effective end of month. Someone opened their mouth. She held up one hand. I built this career to protect the integrity of Seoul's healthcare system, she said quietly. I used it to do the opposite. Those two things cannot sit in the same chair. She closed her folder. She stood. She walked out. And the 12 most powerful people in Seoul's healthcare administration sat in complete silence and listened to her heels fade down the corridor. For the last time. That afternoon, Hyun-ja went back to the clinic in Mapogu. Amara was with a patient. Hyun-ja sat in a plastic chair in the waiting room and waited like everyone else. When Amara came out, Hyun-ja stood. I resigned this morning, she said. I told the board everything. Your record has been cleared. There is a ministry commendation. Hanol Sungsim has been formally notified. Amara looked at her for a long moment. You did not have to do that. Yes, Hyun-ja said simply. I did. A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. The kind that comes after something true has been said and both people know it. How is Juno? Amara asked. Something moved across Hyun-ja's face. The beginning of a person coming back to themselves. He is home. He is complaining about missing football practice. Her voice broke slightly on the laugh that followed. Amara smiled. Small but real. Good, she said. That is all that matters. She picked up her chart. She looked at Hyun-ja one final time with those steady clear eyes. Unchanged. Undiminished. Exactly as they had always been. Go home, Mrs. Choi. Be with your son. And she walked back down the corridor. Hyun-ja stood in that waiting room for a moment longer. She looked at the peeling paint and the plastic chairs and the patients filling the seats around her, the people nobody else was fighting for. The people Amara showed up for every single day. Then she walked outside. She sat in her car. The winter light was thin and pale over Mapogu. She rolled down the window. She let the cold Seoul air in. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she just sat. No phone. No agenda. No power to perform. Just a woman remembering what was actually important. She started the car. She drove home. She walked through the front door. Juno was on the sofa. He looked up. Yama. You are back early. She sat down beside him. She put her arm around him. He leaned into her the way he used to when he was small. Yes, she said. I am. Some people use power to build walls. Others use grace to walk through them. Hyun-ja had the title. The authority. The signature that could open or close any door in Seoul's entire healthcare system. And she used it to destroy a woman who had done nothing but show up with excellence and dignity in a place that did not always make her feel welcome. And Amara had none of that. She had 2 suitcases and her mother's voice and a gift for noticing the things that happen in a body before the body announces them. She had been erased from the system by 4 sentences in a government database. She had almost gone home. She stayed. And in staying, in showing up to that small clinic in Mapogu every morning for people who had nowhere else to go, she became exactly the person that Juno needed when it mattered most. The proud are not punished by others. They are brought low by the weight of their own choices. And the only relief, the only real relief, is truth. Hyun-ja found her truth in a consultation room when a doctor said a name she had spent 2 years hoping never to hear again. Amara had known her truth all along. Her mother gave it to her when she was 12 years old standing on a road in Lagos. Show up. That is the whole job. She showed up. And that, in the end, is the only power that actually lasts. Before you go, I want to ask you something. How is the weather where you are right now? And where in the world are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. We have people watching from all over the world, and I love seeing where these stories are reaching. Tell me your city, your country, your weather right now. Let's see how far this reaches. And if this story moved you, share it with one person who needs to hear it today. Just one person. And if you are not subscribed to Afro Soul Romance Tales yet, do it right now. This channel exists for people who believe that grace is more powerful than authority. That showing up matters more than status. Every subscriber helps us reach more people who need these stories in their life. Hit subscribe. Turn on notifications. I will see you in the next one.